Hi, I'm Doug Eals. I live in Duvall, Washington, and I'm turning 60, and here we go.
We're going to go decade by decade approximately here. So your first decade was on Mercer Island in Mercerwood. So describe a happy experience, or just tell a story, just one story about your days in Mercerwood when you were a little kid.
Well, if I remember right, if I can remember back that far, I remember the other side of the road was woods, and we used to play Army, and one of the big deals, at least for me, was, we used to collect snakes and frogs, and a lot of them at times. And I can't remember the park that we used to go to, or the pond, Scalzels Pond or something like that, that was loaded with them. And so that was a big deal back then. And I can't, I'm thinking that, wow, that was a lot of snakes. I remember that.
So tell me another story about your Mercerwood time.
Well, one thing that was really interesting back then, well, I'll say two things, is that a lot of the families did things together back then. And one big thing was hydroplane races, and we used to we'd make our wood hydroplanes and drag them behind our bicycles, and that even the parents, some of them got into that, and that was a big deal. And I remember specifically these huge capture the flag games that we used to play, and it was amongst like 3 or 4 houses, and again, the parents even got into it. The dads were involved in that one, and I mean, you really kind of don't see that anymore, but you did then, so that was kind of interesting.
Okay, then you get into being a teenager, and we've been moved down to Parkwood on the south end of the Mercer Island. Tell me a story or favorite experience from that time.
Well, in those days, I had a good friend of mine named Kevin Pace, and he and I did a lot of things together. We were in scouts together. His father was the scoutmaster. We did a lot of hiking and camping. Kevin and I actually started up a little kind of wood cutting business kind of thing, and I'm sure if Dad was around, he would say, "Oh God, all that wood piled up in the back of the house." And that's kind of what we did back then to make some kind of money, and we had all kinds of adventures along that line that some I can tell you about and some I can't. But that's where I spent a lot of my time, back at that time frame, and a little bit at the park across the street, and I'm trying to remember Parkwood. And so we did a lot of that with the, I was trying to think of the name of it, the summer park recreation program. I'm pretty involved in that.
So tell me about some of your activity in Island Crest Park.
We used to be pretty, or at least I used to be pretty involved with the Island Crest Park recreation program, and it was a lot of different things. It was baseball and different activities that the park department put together, and did that for quite a few years at that time in my life, and involved a whole bunch of different age level group of kids, and the rec directors that came along with it.
Tell me about one of the adventures with Kevin Pace that you can talk about.
Well, I remember a certain, shall we say, woodcutting adventure that Kevin started off without me, going down a railroad track out of Preston, and his truck died in the tracks, and the train was coming, and there was a pretty good chance it was going to get hit, and I got a call from him to meet up with him at that time to help him try to get his truck going, and he actually had to stop the train, which turned out to be quite the ordeal. And I don't know how he got out of not having to, shall we say, pay restoration for that. But anyway, that was pretty interesting.
Obviously, a lot of your life has revolved around cars. And where did that interest really begin? And some experiences you remember from high school, from community college?
Yeah, I'm not sure what sparked the whole thing to start off. I've always kind of been very mechanical. I'd tear apart all kinds of things and put them back together, and then that kind of led into auto shop in high school, and so I did a lot with that at that time. And so I guess that kind of set the pace for moving forward with my life, and so I think one of my very first cars that I actually worked on was Mom's station wagon that I tore apart, and like I said, that's what got me going, and that led off into South Seattle Community College, and that was kind of a goofy deal because I had applied to go to college there, and they told me I had to apply early. So in my junior year, I signed up to go, and they said you'd probably have to wait a year after you graduated from high school, and so it was kind of like, well, what do I do with myself in between that time frame? And in fact, I don't even remember what I think I'd gotten a job someplace or something to kind of maybe kill some time, you might say. And then they called me up 2 weeks into the would it be the summer quarter or whatever, and was like, get down here. And so, shall we say, change gears, and that started me going there, along with working in gas stations at that time. And that's kind of how I got going with the auto industry part of it.
So from South Seattle Community College, that led to your first real job and long-term job. Tell the story of how you got to work at your first job.
Well, I was at South Seattle Community College, and the one of the classes, the classes are not what you'd call like a typical college class where you'd go for an hour or whatever and then go home and study or something like that. You were there for the whole day for the most part, and you did different sections of automotive or whatever, whichever avenue you were heading off into, and where I was at one point was called a main shop class, which is like you deal with anything that comes in the door kind of thing, and at that time I was kind of the assistant teacher per se, and I was taking care of problems for him and that kind of thing, and he called me into the office one day and he said, I want you to go down and contact Joe Crapo at Washington Natural Gas. He's looking for somebody to take the place of somebody that was on L&I. And so, it was kind of like, oh, when do I go? And he says, leave now. And so I did. And I went down there and met Joe Crapo, and within an hour and a half, I was going upstairs to the personnel department, and I had a job. And the part that was really quite shocking about the whole thing, if I remember correctly, I used to work at gas stations, and I think the wage was like $2.70 an hour, and I was doing at least I'm trying to think 40 hours plus, and I was doing at least another 20 or so a week or something like that on top of that. And and this job that I got with Washington Natural Gas was paying me $6.60 an hour, and I immediately got 2 weeks vacation and all the holidays, and I was just flabbergasted. And I thought, oh, I'm in heaven. This is great, and that's how I started with Washington Natural Gas.
One of the major parts of your work at Washington Natural Gas had to do with compressed natural gas. And, tell about your involvement in that. Describe that.
Well, it kind of started back when I was working in Seattle, and they were opening up the East Side branch or division of the company, and they wanted to know who out of all the mechanics wanted to head over to the East Side, and I immediately said, yeah, me, put me in, because of course we lived on the East Side, or I lived on the East Side at that time, and so it made perfect sense, and I saw it as an opportunity to kind of, shall we say, jump up a bit in level, and not that it got me anything more, except for it would put me in a better arena for that, and it turns out that I turned around and started running the East Side operations for Washington Natural Gas immediately, and along with that came the new avenue the company was going into of compressed natural gas. And so one other person that I hired, along with my boss at that time, we all were flown down to Los Angeles to go through a 2-week training course on how to convert vehicles to natural gas. And that was kind of the jump start of the whole thing for the company at that time. And so on the East Side, we had compressors and converted vehicles, and it just kind of grew from there, and that's how I got involved with that.
But life is not all about work, and so there's a good story here about how you met somebody special, really special.
Well, I was friends of ours mine that Kathy and Mike and Paula, that I knew them through my mother, through her work, and so I was invited over to a party over at their house, and they were, and I met somebody there at that party, and that was Denise, and things changed quickly, and I met her, and later on I come to find out that I had met her before, supposedly, but I couldn't tell you that. Denise could elaborate that more on that subject, but where a whole room full of women, and I somehow got in front of them or by them, and that's supposedly when I met Denise. But I met Denise, and we started dating, and in a very short period of time, I basically proposed to her in 2 weeks' time, and shall we say, the rest is history, and that's the love of my life.
So Denise became very special in a very short period of time. Describe her at that time.
Well, when I first met her, really met her, she was brunette and very pretty and very bubbly personality. We got along perfectly. I don't know, it just clicked. It was just perfect. I couldn't ask for anybody better, and I knew it right from the start, and that's why it didn't take very long to go as far as it did. So I don't know what else to say. She's the love of my life.
Well, as with most couples who get married, pretty soon the topic of kids comes along. How did you guys talk about kids, and what was the first result?
Well, it was the conversation was quite interesting, because Denise wanted 5, and I was like, holy cow, you want 5 kids? And so we kind of batted that back and forth for a while about how many kids to actually have. I mean, I thought maybe 2 was fine, or enough, or whatever you want to say. And so Denise came up with her little plan of, and she called it 2 pregnancies. And I thought I was fairly safe with that one. And as it turned out, that we got, shall we say, the first go around was twins. So I came back and said, okay, we're done. And she says, no, you're not. And I was for sure that if she had anything to say about it, the second one would have been triplets. So luckily enough, although Sean was big enough for 2, there was only 1 more. And so that's kind of how the kids came around. And as happens is that, we all have plans set forward on when we're going to have kids and all that stuff, and it didn't quite pan out that way. Surprises do happen.
So when you look back on your kids when they were young, very young, describe what they were like and describe your reaction to what they were like.
Scott and Chris were, I would say almost from the get-go, they were always into some kind of mischief, always messing around with each other. And it was, besides teasing each other, it was the two of them against us, Denise and I. And so they knew exactly how to pull Denise's chain and get her all wound up. And like I said, they got into all kinds of mischief, all kinds of things, when they're young, and they get a little older and the mischief gets a little more serious and bigger and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that I thought, and it never was really horrible. I mean, it was most of the time comical, and maybe a little bit unbelievable at times. But the other part that goes along with it is that Sean would calmly sit back and watch them get in trouble, and I would ask him occasionally. Sometimes I'd come up on all three of them, and Sean would be stepping back away from the whole thing, and I said, "What are they doing now?" And he says, "That's bad. You don't want to." He says, "I don't want to be part of it." He says, "They're going to get in trouble." And I mean, I give him credit. He watched out for himself, because he just watched them mess up all the time, and that was comical always. He was pretty good about watching that kind of stuff happen and trying to stay out of trouble. But that's Scott and Chris. Yeah, even today they get together, and it's like, oh, look out.
So given all this mayhem, why have you enjoyed being a dad? And give us an example of that enjoyment.
Well, of course you're proud of your kids when they do things, that are special or talented or whatever, and it's fun to be involved with a lot of the, shall we, as you said, mayhem. It's kind of, sometimes it's fun to be involved in that. And so it's kind of the creative side of them coming out, and that's and some of it I see myself in there, and so it's shall we say, I taught them a little bit of stuff down the line, and then they added to it, of course, and that part makes you feel kind of proud, and it's like you passed on a little of yourself to your kids, and they have. All three have grown and matured, and I see a little bit of me in all of them, and I'm very proud of them.
So we're going to take this backwards now. You talked about you can see some of yourself in your kids. What is in you that came from mom and from dad?
Well, from dad, Dad did a lot of. He wasn't necessarily a mechanic necessarily, but the basis I would get it from him. He used to put things together or make wood, something out of wood, and then I'd be involved in that, and that always intrigued me, and so I picked up a lot of those traits from Dad. And Mom, I just she did a lot of craft things, and I got a lot out of that. And not to say that I wasn't a handful for her in the earlier days. I mean, I had my own little problems with reading and stuff like that, and Mom used to take me around to different tutors and different schools, and it was basically don't give up, keep going, and the funny part about it was that she. And I don't really totally acknowledge this, when it happened, but after the fact, she said that all of the pushing to try to get me to study and practice and all that stuff, it got to a point where one counselor said, just back off and let him sink or swim, basically. And the funny part about that is that once mom did that, then I started swimming big time, and I improved quite a bit. And it sounds kind of funny that you say you just let your kids sink or swim, but on the flip side, I'm sure she was there to pick up the pieces. But everything got better after that, and so it was a great move on her part.
So one part of being a parent that you have that's different from most people is that you're a parent of twins, and you get insights into that because you are a twin. What's it like to be a twin, and what was it like to be a twin when you were a kid?
Well, I remember real young on that we were always treated as the same. In fact, mom and dad dressed us the same, and it may have been two different colors of some shirt or sweater or something, but it was the same, and we all, Dave and I both kind of resented that, and I don't remember being verbal about it, or it was between us two, or just between, but I know that we both really, we just don't want to be treated the same. And I don't know exactly when, but at some point early on, we both kind of went separate ways, split apart as far as our interest levels and everything. And so there was this, shall we say, division that happened, and there wasn't any, the twin bonding thing going on at that point in time. So I would say, I don't know, through grade school into high school, junior high, whatever, that we're almost like total strangers per se, and so that's how that went for a long time. And today we're closer now than we have been in a long, long time. And even though there's distance in between where we live, we seem to talk more now than we did. I've talked to Dave more now than I have, and all the way through high school and college and all that stuff. And so I guess it comes around eventually.
Well, another big aspect of life is where you live. And pretty early on, you and Denise, after a couple of moves to a couple of different places on the east side, you found where you wanted to be the rest of your life. Describe moving to your long-term home and how you got involved in the community as a result.
At that time, I was working for Washington Natural Gas, and Denise was pregnant, and her parents had moved out to a place just a little bit beyond Cottage Lake, as they put it, and so they had moved into a house out there which had a piece of property attached to the side of it, and so I get this call from Denise saying, oh, you got to look at this. It looks just perfect for us out there. And she says, just a little bit beyond Cottage Lake. Well, her idea of a little bit beyond and where it is two different things. It's like double the distance in between where I worked and Lake Margaret. And what I tell people about where we live is that, it's the kind of place that you were coming to see us. You weren't driving by, because there's no way to drive by. And so we decided that we could afford to build a house out there on this piece of property, and that's the path I took. And I had never adventured into this large scale of a project in my whole life, and it was hell for a while. And so we ended up moving in with our parents. And I would work during the day, and I'd come home and build on the house. And, at night, I'd go to bed at 1 or 2 in the morning and get back up in the morning and go back to work. And that's how I built the house. We put the house together the way it is. And it is a wonderful place to live. I would really not like to move from there if we could possibly do it. And so far, I've been able to hang in there. It's been since '81. and that's kind of how we got out there. And then, of course, with that comes, possible involvement in the community and being part of that community. And so I got, I don't remember how I got the notice or it wasn't even an invite about the fire department, but they were looking for divers to be part of the team that would go out in the boat to help people that were in the flood area or something like that. And I thought, yeah, I could do that. I was a diver, and I thought, well, I'd fit the bill. And little did I know what was involved in the whole thing. So I ended up going to volunteer at the fire department, which turned out to be, you had to be a firefighter, and eventually it turns into an EMT, and I mean the diving part on the boat is like one minuscule little piece of the whole pie. It's just you get really involved in the whole thing, and that kind of started taking over my time, away from work and home, and so I was a volunteer fireman for almost 10 years. And that became, and the unfortunate part about that is I had to stop because it was beginning to just take over my life. And by the time I stopped with the fire department, I was a captain, and I just had to draw the line. But I wanted to spend more time with the kids, and that's how I got. We started off in Boy Scouts because I had all the wonderful experiences when I was in Boy Scouts myself, and I thought that was a great avenue for him to be in, and it involved hiking and camping and all that stuff, and it turned out that it fit very well with the boys and myself, and Denise really got into it, and so we were in that troop for, boy, I can't even remember how many years now. It was like, I think it was like 12 years or something like that, and the kids all went through all the levels, and Sean became an Eagle Scout out of it, and Scott and Chris were Star Scouts, and it's just being part of the community. It was a great thing. Also, what came along with that too was being involved with Lake Margaret, with the water system, and being on the board, and being part of that whole community effort to supply us water for the lake.
So your home, obviously the address is Duvall, but Lake Margaret is way out on the kind of edge of Duvall, but that's your community. Describe Duvall and Lake Margaret and what you like about it.
Well, one thing we liked about Duvall was that it was a small little town. It was kind of a country little, nothing little town, and it was a fairly, everybody's really friendly, and it was a nice little place, and the difference between Lake Margaret and Duvall is Lake Margaret is way out on the edge of. It's still considered Duvall, but it's like almost not, because it's way it's far out and on the reaches that you can get. And we like living in the country, out in the remote area like that. I think it's a great place to raise the kids, and it's it's out in the woods, and the kids can run free, and do stuff, and I think that was a great benefit for when they grew up, and we still enjoy living at Lake Margaret and being part of that. In fact, we enjoy it as much as it would be. We talk about occasionally is how much of a change, and whether we would or wouldn't like it if we had to move into town, into a residential area or into a condo or something like that. It's almost like, I don't know, one of those kind of things, and I'm sure one day it'll happen, but it's not something I'm, shall we say, looking forward to at this point in time in our lives.
Another thing you ended up doing as an adult is kind of going back to a childhood interest, and that is really getting involved in the annual Seattle hydroplane races. How did that happen, and why did you want to do it?
Well, we've been around seafair and hydroplanes our whole life, and it's always been a fascination of mine to be involved in that. And from an aspect of working on them, not necessarily being at the races and watching them, but as far as working on them. But, you know, it's kind of like one of those things, oh, I'll never get there, you know, kind of thing. And so one day I was at the auto parts store, like I am a lot, and one of the guys behind the counter is a good friend of one of the owners of the hydroplane, or this one hydroplane at that time was Miss Rock, and of course they're always looking for volunteers, and I asked him about it. I said, boy, it'd be kind of cool to do that, and he says, you want to do it? And I said, well, sure, let's. I mean, and that night he took me down to the shop, and I mean, they basically threw tools in my hands and said, get it with it, and that's how it started. And so I started building hydroplanes with them, and I did a lot of. I worked on pretty much most all of the aspects around unlimited hydroplanes. Did a little traveling with them over the course of like 10 years that I was involved with Leland's race team, and there were multiple boats. You know, there's Miss Rock and Picos and Chapman, and I mean it is whoever sponsor whatever, but it's still the same hydroplane or multiple hydroplanes and many engines and lots of fabrication type work, and that's what I used to do. I'd go to work, and after work I'd go up to the hydroplane shop and spend some hours up there before I went home, and that was it was a lot of fun back then. That's what I you know, and I got my wish. I got to be able to play with hydroplanes, you know, the real ones, not just the wood ones we drug behind our boats, behind our bicycles, you know, and so that was the fun part.
So yet another area that you've just dived into is river rafting. And how did you get into river rafting, and what's one of the most memorable experiences you've had being a guide?
Well, when I was with the fire department, there was a guy named Bill Belknap that worked there, or volunteered also, and he was a school teacher, and he knew of another school teacher that had a river rafting company, and they were kind of looking for guides per se. I'm not sure if they were actively looking or if he said, hey, you may want to try this, you know, it's lots of fun, that kind of thing. And I thought, well, that sounds great. You know, it's water. I love water, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And then in the mountains, on the river, that sounds like a lot of fun. And so I went and tried out for it, and they took me on, and I became a guide with that one company. And I guided with them for several years at that point. And so I learned the rivers. And the thing I liked about the river guiding is that you got a personal, you get to spend some really close time with the people on your raft, and you get to learn where they came from and joke around and have fun that way, and so that was always interesting. That part made it interesting, and of course guiding, you know, river was a lot of fun. But the part that really, when it got really more interesting for me, on top of this, was when Scott and Chris decided to become guides, or I should say, were thrown into it per se, because they used to go with me to go on raft trips. If I had an open slot for it, I would take them along, and they were having so much fun with it that they decided they wanted to be a guide. The interesting part was that they were a little too young to be guides, but they kind of got recruited, you know, when things got, you know, skinny with guides, and so they started doing it for, you know, them and so you know, it went from taking them down the river to them going with me down the river, guiding other groups, and you know, again, passing on a bit of your piece of yourself on to them and being very proud of what they're doing. And some of the zany things, again, that those two would come up with that would just make it all that much more interesting. And that was, those are some of the more memorable pieces, is when they were, guiding with me,
What, just describe one of the zany things they would come up with.
I can remember one time going down the Wenatchee River, and there's a one set of rapids called Rock and Roll, and there's one piece in there, they call it the Devil's Hole, which is something you totally stay away from because it's like dropping into a big hole, and usually ends up dumping your boat and everybody in it and all that stuff. And we were setting up for rock and roll, ready to go, and Scott's behind me, and the next thing I know, he's over to the right, going in Devil's Hole, straight into it, and I'm yelling at him to get out of there, and he just looks over at me and shrugs his shoulders and goes into it. And I don't know how he stayed upright, but it was, I thought, oh man, I'm gonna have to fish him out of the river somewhere, and that part, like I said, he got through it, so I can give him credit for that.
So the older we get, and if we have kids, the next thing that comes along is grandkids. Describe all of your grandkids. You have a few now, and their names and where they're at and who they're connected to. And what's it like being a grandparent? How is that different from being a parent?
Well, there's 6 now, and the real obvious thing is, people always say this, and it's kind of true, is that you can spoil them and do all kinds of things, and then you send them home, and you even get to buy them the noisy toys and the whole bit, and so this will really piss off Scott or Chris or whatever, and so you can get away with that kind of stuff. But the grandkids are great. They're just fun to be around. And the part that's really nice about them is that you can see bits and pieces of your sons in them, and some of it's like, haha, it's coming around. you're gonna have to deal with this now, kind of thing. And so Scott has 3 grandkids, or he has 3 kids, and there's Cadence and Lex and Declan. And so I always tell Scott, I said, you were kind of into women in the high school days, and I said, guess what? It's coming around. You got your 2 daughters, and you're going to have to deal with them, and they are probably going to be a handful. I can tell just by looking at them. And you refer to Declan as the boy, and because he's a handful, and so it's like, well, again, it's something, it's kind of shades of Dad. Here you go. And so then there's Chris and his 2, and there's Connor and Parker, and Connor, which is kind of scary at this point. He's driving now. God help us all. And then there's Parker, and Parker is, there's so much of Chris and Parker that it's like looking into a mirror at times. The stuff he pulls and the stuff he says, it just reminds me so much of Chris that I don't know, it's just a mirror image of him, I think. And last but least, Sean, and he's got Jax now, and he's, I don't know, he's just a little spitfire, the little guy, and pretty young at this point. But Sean is all I should say, all 3 of them have turned into wonderful fathers, and it's nice to see that all happen. It's just, they're all very happily married, and the kids are great, and I just love being part of them.
Of course, one thing that tells something about somebody is who they marry. And each of your three sons has married and had kids, as we've described. But talk about the wives of your kids and why you think they got together, or what characteristics of them fit your sons.
Well, Scott is married to Amy, and he met her down in Louisiana. I think Amy's different in the fact that she, or I would say either accepts or has been used to guys that are gone for long periods of time, like Scott is offshore, and the traveling he does, and so she seems to fit real well with this, their lifestyle the way it is, and of course we didn't know Amy beforehand, but she's just a wonderful addition to the family, and a pleasure to be around, and so she's like I said, it seems to fit Scott to a T, and they seem to get along really well. And then there's Chris, and Chris is a little different in the fact that Christina was Chris's best friend for pretty much as far back as I can remember, quite a long time, and the funny part about the two of them is that they kept, shall we say, dancing around this, dating thing, but not dating and friends and stuff for a long time. And at some point, and I don't remember who said, "Why don't you just get married and get it over with?" And they did, and they are very happily married. And Chris is, very happy with her, and she's just great to be around. And then with Sean. Sean knew Alicia back in, I think it was grade school, or maybe junior high anyway, and they kind of, I don't know, Sean a few words, from the story goes is that, he didn't show, he worshipped her from afar or something like that, and so they kind of went their separate ways when Sean went into to become a Marine. He didn't want to have any, let's say, attachment because he'd be gone for long periods of time, and so they, I guess, persevered at the end and started communicating. And when he was over in Iraq, and they. When he came back, then they got back together again, and of course then that led into being married. And so they, all three, daughter-in-laws have just been wonderful, and I think my sons are very lucky that they have women that will put up with them. So I think it's worked out very well.
So you are heading into turning the big 6-0 here in about 3 or 4 days. How do you feel about turning 60?
Well, back a ways I would have said, "God, that's old," and sometimes I feel like I'm 60. I don't know. I don't necessarily feel that way the way I am now. Yeah, things don't move the way they did and all that stuff, but I just don't think I feel that age at this point in time. But in a roundabout way, I kind of joke to people about feeling like an old fart, and I just, it just seems to be a point of comedy, to say that. So, and that's kind of how I feel about it.
So your friends and your family, they're looking at you and your whole life, your 60 years of life. What kind of a guy do you think they see? And what kind of a guy would you like them to see?
Well, I would hope, and I would think that they would say that I'm a nice guy, and they like having me around, and not ready to kick me to the curb just yet, and I think I have a pretty big, broad area of people that I know, and they, like me and or love me, depending on who you're talking about, and I feel real blessed that I know them all. So I think I have a great group of friends, and I don't know. I just, I think it's been a great life, to this point. I really do. Ups and downs, and all the changes that happen, and we're still smiling and laughing and trying to have a good time. So I think, so who knows what's next after 60, and I will just play it by ear, day by day, keep going.